This is how the second Mughal emperor died. Not in a glorious battle, not by a treacherous poison plot, not even with a shred of dignity. He died falling down the stairs of his own library. He tripped on his robes, tumbled down the steep marble steps, and cracked his head open. His reign ended not with a bang, but with a clumsy, pathetic thud. And somehow, this absurd end was the least tragic thing that ever happened to him. His life was a masterclass in failure, a story of betrayal, addiction, and catastrophic defeat. But it's also a story of survival, a story that explains how the most unfortunate emperor in history managed to father its greatest. This is the unbelievable story of Humayun. It all began with his father's death. In 1530, Babur, the founder of the Mughal Empire, lay dying. With his last breath, he passed the enormous, newly conquered empire to his eldest son, Humayun. "I will make you proud, father," the weeping prince swore. He was only 22 years old, suddenly the ruler of the largest and richest kingdom in India. But inheriting a throne is easy. Keeping it, that's a different story. Babur had 4 sons, but he left his empire to just one. And the other 3, Kamran, Ascori, and Hindal, were consumed by jealousy. Humayun, trying to be a good son and brother, offered to divide the administration of the empire. Divide. His brother Kamran scoffed. "You mean you take the capital Delhi, while we get the scraps?" Humayun's attempt at peace backfired spectacularly. His brother saw his diplomacy not as strength, but as weakness. A weakness to be exploited. Within months, Kamran declared himself the independent ruler of Kabul and Punjab, effectively ripping the western half of the empire away. Soon after, his other brothers followed suit, carving out their own little kingdoms. They were his own flesh and blood, but they were also his first and most damaging enemies. In just a couple of years, Humayun had lost almost half the empire his father had bled to build, and his greatest weakness wasn't a lack of intelligence. It was his kindness. He was a good man in a job that required a touch of ruthlessness. He simply trusted too much. As his family turned on him and his empire began to crack, Humayun looked for an escape, and he found it in the hazy, sweet smoke of opium. Some historians say he used it to numb the pain of his failures and betrayals. Others say it was a pre-existing vice that spiraled out of control under pressure. Either way, the result was the same. While the emperor was lost in his dreams, the empire crumbled. Military reports went unread. Council meetings were endlessly delayed. Decisions were never made. He became a ghost on his own throne, a smiling, placid shell of a ruler, and his enemies noticed. While Humayun slumbered, a new power was rising in the east. A man who was everything Humayun was not. His name was Sher Shah Suri. He was a brilliant general, a cunning strategist, and a stone-cold, sober administrator. He had spent decades building his power base, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And with a drug-addled, indecisive emperor on the throne, that moment had arrived. Sher Shah wanted Delhi. In 1539, their armies finally clashed at the Battle of Chausa. Humayun had more men, but Sher Shah had a plan. He used the terrain, the river, the monsoon rains, everything to his advantage. The Mughal army, large but disorganized, fell into chaos. They panicked and ran. Humayun himself was forced to flee for his life, jumping into the raging Ganges River to escape capture. He almost drowned and was only saved when a humble water carrier threw him an inflated water skin to use as a float. The Emperor of India, humiliated, soaking wet, his army annihilated, had been saved by a commoner. It was a devastating defeat, but it was about to get much, much worse. 1 year later, in 1540, Humayun, having somehow scraped together another army, faced Sher Shah again at the Battle of Kannauj. This time, it wasn't a defeat. It was an obliteration. Sher Shah's forces were a disciplined, lethal machine. The Mughal army was completely routed, and Humayun was once again running for his life. Sher Shah Suri marched into Delhi, sat on the Mughal throne, and declared himself the new emperor. The Mughal dynasty, after just 14 years, was over. Humayun had lost everything. He had no throne, no army, no home. All he had left was his pregnant wife, Hamida Banu Begum, and the crushing shame of total, absolute failure. He was now a fugitive in the land he once ruled. His only option was to flee west into the brutal, unforgiving Thar Desert. The journey was a nightmare. The sun was merciless. Water ran out. His horses and then his men began to collapse and die from heat and thirst. He watched his pregnant wife suffer, barely able to stay upright on a donkey. In that wasteland, there were no emperors or servants, only desperate survivors. Against all odds, they stumbled upon an oasis, the territory of a local Rajput chief. The chief, seeing the pregnant queen's condition, took pity on them. He offered them a tent and shelter. And there, on October 15, 1542, in a borrowed tent in the middle of a desert, while his father was a landless refugee, a son was born. His name was Akbar. Holding his newborn child, Humayun had nothing to offer him. No kingdom, no wealth, no future. Just a whisper of a promise. One day, he told his son, "I will take it all back. For you." But that day was a long way off. For months, they wandered, begging for shelter. Former allies turned them away, terrified of Sher Shah's wrath. Even his own brother Hindao refused to help. "Join you?" he asked. "You have nothing. You are nothing." Humayun was utterly alone, abandoned by his own blood, with a handful of loyal followers, his wife, and his infant son. The emperor who lost everything finally left India completely, crossing the border into Persia as a refugee. He would spend the next 15 years in exile. So why did it all go so wrong? Humayun was a scholar, a poet, a philosopher. He loved astronomy and art, but he was indecisive when he needed to be bold, and too merciful when he needed to be ruthless. He studied the stars while his enemies studied maps. His father Babur was a warrior king. Humayun was a philosopher, prince, born for a time of peace but forced to live in a time of war. His enemy, Sher Shah, loved only one thing: victory. Arriving in Persia, Humayun was a beggar at the court of the powerful Shah Tahmasp. So, the mighty Mughal emperor comes begging. The Shah mocked. But something had changed in Humayun. The shame, the hardship, the desert tit had burned away his weakness. "I was weak," Humayun replied, his voice steady. "I will not be weak again." Holding his sleeping son Akbar that night, he made a vow. They all laughed at him. They all said he was finished. But he would not let his son grow up as the son of a failure. He would return. He would wait. He would learn. He would plan. And he would take back his empire. The story of Humayun's failure was over. The story of his comeback was just beginning. To see how the worst emperor in history learned from his mistakes and began his epic journey back to the throne, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on for the next episode. Thanks for watching.